Hello, everybody. Welcome to the History of Diving Museum. We're located in the beautiful Florida Keys at mile marker 83. We have some visitors that are here in the research library and Amanda, who is joining us by Zoom, our presenter tonight. If you're also a participant on Zoom, go ahead in the chat and put where you're visiting or where you're joining us from, how many people are with you. And if you have a question, go ahead and put it in the chat box. Julia will be moderating and will be at different points interjecting with different questions. And I'll be getting questions from people that are in the library. Next month's presentation, we will have Dr. Heather Stewart. She is a mangrove ecologist and she's with Fish and Wildlife. She'll be joining us, and it's also going to be the opening of our Dive into Art Edge of the Sea exhibit, which will be open from January to April. And tonight, we want to thank our sponsors, the Missu family, who are actually from Houston, Texas. They're participants on our board and longtime supporters of the museum. They're bringing it free to the community tonight. And Amanda is our presenter. She is the curator for Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. It's the historical site, the Battleship TEXAS. It was commissioned in 1914 and served in both World War I and World War II. It's a float, and it's really interesting to get the different perspectives on how to handle a bricks and mortar museum like we have, and then and your puppy dog, and yes, how you all handle that. So
she wants to be
Amanda,
part of the show.
All right. Well, I will turn it over to you.
Hello, everyone. So as Lisa said, my name's Amanda, and I am one of the curators for the Battleship TEXAS State Historic Site, which is part of the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. And tonight I'm going to be going into how the TEXAS went from being a warship to a floating museum, which, as you can imagine, is quite the transition. So let's see. There we go. So we'll start just with some background on the ship. So her official name is USS Texas BB-35, and she is a dreadnought battleship that served in both World War I and World War II. The USS Texas was authorized by Congress in 1910 and was built by the Newport News Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company in Newport News, Virginia. She was launched on May 18th, 1912, and was officially commissioned on March 12th, 1914, which is again active service for the U.S. Navy. And so the Texas is a New York class battleship, and at the time of her commissioning, her and her sister ship, the USS New York, were the two most powerful battleships in the world, and their 14-inch guns, which are still on the ship today, were the largest in existence on any ship. And in the photo here, you can see a crowd watching the launching of the ship from Virginia back in 1912. And so naturally, the first, kind of active combat that the ship saw was during World War I, when it participated in maneuvers against the German fleet in the North Sea. And then following the armistice on November 11th, 1918, she was part of the Grand Fleet, along with several British ships, which escorted the German fleet to the Firth of Forth for Germany's surrender. So that was kind of her first wartime experience. And then in between the war, she became the vanguard of developing naval aviation. And on March 9th, she became the first U.S. Navy battleship to have a plane flown off of her after Commander Edward O. McDonnell flew a Sopwith Camel off of a platform on the #2 turret, which is essentially kind of a tower on the ship. And then from 1925 to 1927, the Texas underwent extensive modernization, after which she once again reflected the latest technology of the US Navy, and she served as the flagship of the commander of the Americas. And during this time, there was lots of visitors to the ship. Several presidents came aboard, and as well as you can see the photo here, Charles Lindbergh flew one of the planes off of the ship in 1929. All right, and then World War II. She served throughout the entirety of World War II, during which she served in all major theaters of the war, part in the landings in North Africa, the D-Day invasions of Normandy, and the battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. She sustained her only wartime damage on January 25th during the Battle of Cherbourg, where her armored conning tower was hit by a German 240 millimeter shell, demolishing the bridge and killing the helmsman Christian Christensen. So this was her only damage during, and Christensen was die during German shell penetrated but failed to explode. And the men found it later after the battle, and the crew kept it and has served as a good luck souvenir on the ship ever since. So in the pictures here, you can see the 3-inch anti-aircraft gun crew in action during the invasion of Normandy. And then above that, you have General Dwight D. Eisenhower, as well as Admiral Bryant and Captain Baker of the Texas during World War II aboard the ship. And this is actually where General Eisenhower delivered his speech to the men in preparation for D-Day. So following the end of the war, Texas participated in what was called the Operation Magic Carpet and made 3 magic carpet runs to California, bringing more than 4,200 troops in the Pacific. So a lot of the sailors that were being brought home were men who had been in POW camps. And so the ship was super packed. They were trying to get as many men home as possible. So this picture on the left honestly doesn't really do it justice of how crowded it was. Men who served on the ship were giving up their sleeping bunks and sleeping on the deck just as in order to get as many men home as possible. And then on April 21st, 1948, the USS Texas was decommissioned by the Navy and turned over to the state of Texas, becoming the first permanent battleship memorial in the United States. And currently, the Battleship Texas is the last remaining dreadnought and the only remaining battleship that served in both World War I and World War II. So that's the background of the ship, kind of the why she's significant, why we wanted to turn her into a museum back in 1948. So now we'll get into more of how that happened. So most ships at the time were used for target practice, and that was the original designation for Texas as well. So she was an older ship. She was mothballed from June 18th, 1946 through January 1948, which essentially means the Navy was keeping her in case they needed her for anything else, but she was no longer being used actively. And so she was slated for target practice. Her sister ship, the New York, had been used as a target ship during Operation Crossroads and sunk in 1948. which was the fate of many older naval vessels at this time. However, the Texas citizens rallied behind their namesake ship and raised her permanently in Texas. And Texas school children actually played a huge role in this and conducted a nickel campaign across the state to raise funds, where they asked people to donate their nickels. And this was successful. They raised enough money to get her to Texas. And the Battleship Texas Commission was established by the Texas legislature in 1947 and put in charge of. So she was officially recommissioned as the flagship of the Texas Navy, which is just an honorary title, does not actually exist, and moored at the San Jacinto battleground on April 21st, 1948, which is the anniversary of the Battle of San Jacinto. So in the photo here, you can see her in her slip at San Jacinto, and you can see the San Jacinto monument in the background. So they're, tourist site for Texans, where you could see both the battleground and the ship in one place. Like I said, so the main reason that the ship came to Texas is because the citizens of Texas really rallied behind it, really wanted to. And so here's kind of just an example of kind of the excitement level for the ship coming to Texas. And this is a special edition of the Houston Press that was devoted entirely to the Battleship Texas after it was announced that she would be arriving just outside of Houston. So all of the articles are about the ship, and then all of the advertising within its pages were also tributes to the ship. So you can see this one advertisement on the right from a Texas Gulf Sulfur Company that reads, "A great and hearty welcome to a great battleship. The Texas has made history in 2 world wars and will perpetuate her record as a shrine where visitors will be rededicated to the principles of liberty and democracy. The return of this ship to its native state is a unique event and an outstanding tribute to the Battleship Texas and to the state of Texas. May all Texans and all Americans receive inspiration from this noble ship through the years." And most of the other advertisements kind of similarly flowery in tribute to the ship. So the commission successfully got the ship to Texas. It had the campaign, run by school children. They had a lot of support to get her there. But turns out, being the first, floating battleship museum, and more difficult than many were expecting. So after saving the ship from being scrapped, the new staff had to figure out how to turn a battleship into a museum and how to keep an aging ship afloat with a much smaller crew than she was used to. So when she was in active service, she would have a crew of, several thousand men running the ship. Whereas once the commission took over, a maintenance staff of about 15 men. So lot more difficult to keep her in peak condition. So in that regard, creating the museum aspect ended up being the easy part in comparison to keeping the ship afloat, which would prove to be a problem for generations to come. And then on the right here, we have a picture of one of the former crew members who served during World War II, Tony Bissonette, visiting the ship with his wife in 1991. which is one of the really cool parts about preserving the ship as a museum, is that over the years, it has served as a place for crew member reunions and other celebrations where they can come back and, honor the ship and honor their time in the Navy. So the first step in turning the battleship into a museum was creating a museum collection, which is what I now work on. So at the time, the Navy removed everything that they could still use from the ship before turning it over to the state of Texas. But they lent some of the larger equipment on permanent loan. So essentially, that was out to have a use for anymore. But a lot of the larger equipment the museum staff had to get from other scrapped battleships or just other ships in general. So a lot of the larger guns you'd see on main deck, some of that is original to the ship, but some of it has been added from other battleships. The Navy also turned over records such as logs, newsletters, maps, and things they were able to share and that they didn't have a use for. Kind of formed the core of the collection initially, and then we worked on starting to collect from other places. And then the photo here is the unexploded German shell that I mentioned earlier that served as a good luck souvenir on the ship. It is still on the ship now. It is just, but it's still there, still serving as a good luck charm. So next, the ship staff began cataloging items for the collection that sailors had left behind on the ship once they departed. And unsurprising, many of these items ended up being pinups that the men had put in their lockers, left in their living spaces, or attached to their bulkhead. So here we got of some of the ones we found, some options, but two of them were attached to the bulkhead near the men's sleeping spaces. The one in the middle of the woman, Margaret or Marjorie Mahaffey, in the hula skirt was actually kept by her husband, Bill, while he was serving aboard the ship. And he wrote a message on the back about how excited he was to receive the photo and that he had been waiting for it. So, things like this, as well as just other photos of family members, sometimes uniforms, papers, documents, things like that, sailors would leave behind. And since the ship is so large, we've been coming across stuff, ever since the museum opened. Just a couple months ago, some of the maintenance crew found a shoe that had been left on top of a locker that we hadn't found before. So things like that get placed into the collection. But these days, our largest part of the collection comes from crew members themselves or their family members who have chosen to donate these items to the ship in order that they can be preserved. So these items include pretty much everything. We've got uniforms, photos, diaries, scrapbooks, postcards, and any other souvenirs that the men might have collected or worked on. And these really help provide a look at the daily lives of sailors who served on our ship and help us to tell the story of the Battleship Texas during both wars. So, some of the examples here, we've got a photo of the men from the 3rd Division celebrating Christmas in 1930 1929, all of the different divisions would have kind of their own decorations each year, just to make it a little bit more festive while they were away from home. We've also got a birthday card that Captain received while he was serving. We've got a scrapbook from 1925 owned by gunner's mate Clayton George Hilborn. And these scrapbooks were often given out to sailors with just slight variations, and then they could fill them with whatever photos they wanted. They often included, addresses of other men they served with, and would include kind of silly nicknames for them, quotes that the other guys would write, things like that. And then the last item here is an apron that was made by sailor Lester Dean Carter for his wife. And this was actually something that a bunch of the sailors did while they were serving, is they would use old uniforms, or in this case, a neckerchief, and turn it into aprons for their wives, moms, daughters, whoever, and use that as like birthday gifts, Mother's Day gifts, things like that. Since they didn't have access to a lot of stuff on board the ship, this was something that they could do more easily. And you can see here, the sailor attached, his patch to it as well, just to give it a little bit more personalization. So, as I mentioned earlier, creating the museum ended up being a little more straightforward, but keeping the ship afloat ended up being the really challenging part of turning her into a museum. So, although the commission successfully raised the funds to get the ship to Texas, they continually struggled to raise the funds necessary to maintain the ship, and as a result, she began to deteriorate. So metal surfaces began to rust, pipes open to the sea failed, causing various voids and bunkers to flood. And by the late 1960s, the wooden main deck was completely rotted, allowing rainwater to leak through. They attempted to fix this by putting in a concrete deck, but that actually just made the problem worse. And so eventually they did go back to a wooden deck, but they were not able to replace it immediately. So that caused a lot of into the lower levels of the ship. So despite, or perhaps because of these struggles, the commission successfully had the ship designated as a National Historic Mechanical Engineering Landmark by the American Society of Mechanical Engineers in 1975, and as a National Historic Landmark by the National Park Service in 1976. So this would help ensure that the ship would be maintained and make it more difficult to, give up on her or scrap her. And the mechanical engineering landmark was given because of the steam engines originally used on the ship. The Texas was actually the last battleship with reciprocating marine engines installed in her. So that was considered, pretty important, and they were able to get the landmark for that. In the photo here, you can see a staff member looking up at a hole in the ship in an unknown space, and you could find those, pretty much all over. We have another photo coming up. A newspaper article from the Houston Chronicle where you see a staff member on the ship inspecting a partially flooded compartment, looking for rust damage. And so it's time, a lot of local news reports started discussing the failing condition of the ship and how, the commission was struggling keep her afloat and how we were failing the ship, things like that. So eventually the state did take action and decided to transfer the battleship to Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, which is who I work for. So due to financial limitations preventing the commission from implementing major maintenance, the Texas legislature transferred the battleship to TPWD on September 1st, 1983. And TPWD immediately conducted a detailed study evaluating the ship's condition. And in 1988, she was towed to Todd Shipyard in Galveston, Texas for necessary repairs. And once again, Texas citizens rallied behind the ship, raising funds to help with the cost of repairs. So once again, Texas school children played a really big part in this. They had seen reports or heard from, their grandparents' generation about the nickel campaign. And so a group of fifth graders decided to run their own quarter campaign, which soon spread across the state. And the ship raised money that way. And then they also did a can drive throughout the state, which raised just over $65,000 to help with repairs for the battleship. So once again, the citizens of Texas were really invested in the continuation of the ship as a museum and as a memorial. So she went to Galveston, got the repairs she needed, and then was towed back to San Jacinto Battleground Slip and reopened to the public in 1990. So the battleship now, despite those repairs, which were much needed, the ship began to deteriorate again because we still do not have a full crew to maintain her. So in 2018, the Battleship Texas Foundation began a campaign to have the ship moved out of the water and placed into a permanent dry dock to better help with long-term stability. So the idea being that the ship sitting in salt water constantly was very corrosive to the hull. It was causing lots of leaks. Several tons of water were having to be pumped out of the ship on a daily basis. And if that didn't happen, she would start to list pretty severely. When I first worked for the ship back in 2018, we had a really bad storm one day. It knocked all the power off on the ship. The backup generators didn't turn on. All the pumps stopped working. And eventually the maintenance crew had everyone leave except for them because the ship was starting to list pretty severely. Luckily, they're very good at their job. They were able to get the pumps back up. But, issues with this really make it difficult to have a successful museum and make it difficult to keep her in good shape. So, like I said, the foundation was trying to get her put in dry dock. And once again, as in the past, they turned to the citizens of Texas. In this case, though, they started a petition that they had people sign for the legislator asking them to approve, dry dock. Unfortunately, this was unsuccessful. The Texas legislature did not approve placing her in permanent dry dock. However, in February of 2019, the legislature did vote to turn the ship's operations over to the Battleship Texas Foundation and to provide $35 million for repairs. So Texas Parks and Wildlife still owns the ship and we own the collection for the ship, but our foundation, who is able to do a lot more fundraising since they are not a state entity, now manages the operations and maintenance of the ship. And so she closed down in 2019 to start making preparations for her journey. And finally, on August 31st of this year, she was once again towed to Todd Shipyard in Galveston for those repairs. And you can see this photo of her there in the dry dock. And that is where she is currently. And the repairs are expected to take about a year. Afterwards, she will be going to a new home. So she will not be returning to San Jacinto Battleground, where she has been since 1948. But the new home has not been decided yet. All that's known is that it will be somewhere on the Texas coast, and hopefully somewhere where it's a little bit easier with the battleground, which has been really nice. It's a little bit out of the ways. It's next to a lot of refineries and chemical plants. So it's proven difficult to get a lot of people out there, and they're hoping they can change that with a new site. So that is the bulk of my presentation. I know this was pretty fast, but I figured this time of year people are pretty busy, and I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions from anyone. Also, just wanted to leave this information. If you're interested in following the battleship's repairs in Galveston, you can keep up to date on the Battleship Foundation's website, which is just battleshiptexas.org. They provide really on their website. They also have a YouTube page, Facebook, and Instagram where they post regular updates as well. And then if you have any like research or collection questions, you can email at curatorial@tpw.texas.gov, which is an email that goes to myself and my boss. And we're always happy to answer any questions or talk about donations.
Great. I saw one of our actually toured the Texas 33 years
great.
ago. And I think it was it's the only one near Galveston,
so it's
right?
the only, there's a submarine in Galveston, and then there is another ship there, but she is not a battleship, and I'm forgetting her name right now.
Okay.
And then a couple hours from Galveston in Corpus Christi, there is the USS Lexington, which is now a museum ship as well, but she's a little bit newer than the Texas.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this question, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. This question is from William. He asks, why wasn't the dry docking approved?
You know, I don't know the specifics of that because a lot of it is politics, to be quite honest. But I think the main thing it came down to was the cost of dry docking it. I think the legislator felt that it would be too high of a cost in, you know, the immediate. And so they just weren't willing to put up that money for it. Oh, thank you, David, for reminding me the name of the other ship, the Elisa. Yes, thank you.
This question's from Andrew. Is it open to the public? And if not, when do you think it will be open? How much does a tour cost?
So it is not fully open right now, but the foundation is doing tours on Sundays. So, you know, since the ship's getting repaired right now, there's a lot of work being done, but they don't work on Sundays. And so they are offering hard hat tours. And I'm not entirely sure how much of the ship they have open during that, or if you're even able to get on the ship itself or just walk around the dry dock. I don't remember the cost off the top of my head, but if you go to the Foundation's website, which is battleshiptexas.org, I know they have the tickets listed on there, and I think it might be one of the first things that pops up when you open the website. So they're doing that on Sundays for the foreseeable future. And then as soon as the repairs are done and they have a new home decided on, they'll be working to get the museum fully open again as soon as possible.
Okay, another question from David. Is restoration only hull or does it include other spaces?
It includes other spaces. So they're doing mostly hull work right now, I believe. I think that's, their first focus, but they are doing other spaces as well. For example, a lot of the staterooms where, like officers lived and worked, were in really bad shape, and the floors were rusted through. There was holes that like I could fall through. So they are working to repair some of those interior spaces as well. But certainly the main goal is to try and prevent the like leaks through the hole so that she's not having to constantly pump out so much water.
Okay, this one is from Nicholas. He asks, are you preserving the ship in perpetuity or do you have an anticipated lifespan for her?
The plan has always been to preserve her in perpetuity. There's not a plan beyond that. So hopefully we're able to do that. She's really important to a lot of people, but there's no telling how people in the future will feel, and they might decide on a different path. But for right now, the plan is to keep her for as long as we physically can.
Okay, Lisa asks, what was the average age of the sailors and how long were they stationed on the ship?
So that really depended. And I don't know the average age off the top of my head, but most of them were quite young. So with the exception of like the captain and some of the other like upper officers who would be older, most of the men were in their 20s. And many of them would be, like young 20s. So by and large, they were very young. And I would say, once again, it kind of depended, especially if it was in wartime versus peacetime. During wartime, they would often stay on the ship a little bit longer, whereas during peacetime, they might get transferred around a little bit more. But a lot of the men that I've seen or done research in, I feel like 2 years is about average. Once again, some would be less, some would be longer than that.
Okay, this one's from David and Lisa. What was special about this steam engine? And Lisa asks, are the engines still in the ship?
So I'm not an engineer, so I don't know exactly what this means, but they were reciprocating steam engines, and they were the last reciprocating marine engines installed in a naval ship. That is the extent of my knowledge on that. But yes, they are still on the ship. There's a whole very large engine room on the third deck. It's very impressive to see. So I highly recommend it once the ship is open again.
Okay, this is a question from me personally. Do you know of any other battleship museums that are similar to the Texas? And did any other of the museums learn kind of from the restoration of the Texas when they were making theirs?
Yes. So now there are several battleship museums in the US. I definitely could not name all of them. None of them are as old as the Texas. She's the only one who served in World War One. A lot of the other ones served in World War II, was like their first kind of action. So most of them did learn a lot from watching kind of the trials and tribulations that the Texas staff went through, turning her into a museum. Some of the other ones, I can think of other state ones I can think of that we've been in communication with is New Jersey has one now. The Alabama is a really well-known one, really big one. And I already mentioned the Lexington down in Corpus. There's some in California. So there are several other ships now. Most of them much newer though, and having the benefit of having learned from our mistakes.
Okay, I do think that is it for the questions. So thank you so much, Amanda. That was really great.
Hello. I was checking with our visitors, getting some questions from them, but I think we've got them all answered. I think it's fascinating, the fact that this ship served in World War I and World War II is a historical significance to keep it afloat and all the efforts you're doing. So thank you so much. And having the sailors and their families have the opportunity to come back and share with you that experience. For it's similar to us when we take people diving on ships that are now artificial reefs. It really means a lot to have that connection, to know that you've walked the same deck that they did generations
we actually
ago.
just had one of our veterans from World War II. He just had his 101st birthday. Wow. And he just came and visited the ship down in Galveston in the dry dock. So it's pretty cool.
So even though it's in dry docks, they still are allowed to have they can get on it and board it for these hard hat tours.
Yes. Yeah. Only on Sunday when the actual work isn't being done. But even then you have to have the hard hats, you have to have, jeans, covered shoes. I think they prefer steel toe, but I don't think that's required.
Right. But, okay. Yeah. I do have actually one more question that just got posted in the chat from John.
Absolutely.
He asks, are any floating museums checked by divers regularly?
So I don't know about other museums, and we were not checked regularly, but we did have divers who worked with the ship quite often. So after the repairs in the late 80s, we had kind of like these bastions put up to help hold the ship in place. And that allowed divers to more easily access her in the water. And so we did actually have a crew of divers who were really helpful in keeping the ship, up and running for the past several years, who helped identify, where issues were, where leaks were, and help to repair them.
I know that we have a floating Coast Guard ship, the Ingham, that's down in Key West, and they definitely use divers and commercial divers to assess, help weld. It's a metal ship, so they can do more, but they do use, divers to visually inspect it and work with it. So
yeah. more power to them, because that is some very brackish water that the ship is sitting in. So the visibility is not great.
Correct. None of the shipping harbors are.
Yeah.
But well, we want to thank you for taking the time with us today and helping, serve our memberships, serve our community, and, just get the word out about some other military adventures that people can go on and come visit. And we want to thank you and give you a annual membership. So if you can't come down and take advantage of it, you can have your parents come down and through them take advantage of it.
They would love that.
And we are pet friendly if you bring the puppy with you.
I don't know how well she would do. She clearly does not have the best manners, but
okay. So thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank y'all.
All right. If we have no more questions, I think, people are saying thank you. Merry Christmas. Great presentation. And
thank you.
Great. All right. Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.